liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
You're tapped in, so let's get right to it. We want to talk about Africa today, and not just Mali, Burkina Faso, or Niger, but also throw into that pot the Congo. And the Congo is going through some real trying times right now. It's war torn. There are all kinds of countries over there, European mostly, maybe even some Russian, some Chinese. But the land is being pillaged. It's being raped for its resources. The Congolese people are suffering. They're not reaping any of the benefits from this extraction by these foreign nations, partly because these foreign nations, in their own way, incite wars, civil wars within the country. They have pitted the people against themselves. And while they're fighting each other, Congolese, the European nations are in there extracting resources, especially those types of resources in the Congo that Western nations need, especially nations in the EU, United States, and others. This is, it's a dire situation, to say the least. All right. Let me get into this. Africa holds roughly 30% of the world's mineral reserves. Okay, 30%. All right, including most of what's needed for the energy transition and tech. Cobalt from the DRC, that is the Congo, lithium, uranium from Niger, gold. Yet the value-added processing has historically happened elsewhere, meaning African economies capture raw extraction revenue, but not the higher margin refining or manufacturing profits. Okay, that's where the money is. And this is where these countries, or those countries in Africa, are being excluded from the real wealth of the extraction of these resources. Analysis have pointed out that even EU funded critical minerals projects framed as mutually beneficial and are still geared mainly towards getting resources out of Africa and into European supply chains rather than building processing capacity on the continent. And again, this is a way to eliminate or exclude the DRC, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso from reaping the real benefits of these resources. They extract them raw. They pay them for the extraction of the raw materials, ship them out. And over there is where the real money is made through processing, manufacturing, processing, and refining. So Africa does not even sees none of that real wealth. All right. The security relationship, though, compounds this argument. For decades of French EU counterterrorism presence in the Sahel coincided with continued uranium and gold extraction. In other words, while they were over there supposedly fighting terrorists in these JNIM and Al Qaeda, or whoever, ISIS, supposedly fighting terrorism, the EU and French, as well as United States government. At the same time, they were extracting the minerals, the resources. They were taking the resources and profiting handsomely off of them. Now, while local populations saw little development itself, a major driver of the anti-French, anti-EU sentiment behind the recent coups, that would be in this respect, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, saying, hey, you know what? We see what the issue is. We see the problem. Let's deal with this. Let's overthrow these puppet governments who are allowing these foreign corporations and governments into our countries, helping to extract, and then exporting our raw minerals, taking them over there, refining them, processing them, and making large sums of money that does not see its way back into these impoverished, war-torn nations. All right. So debt structures is also a problem. Trade terms also a problem, and historically low African access to global capital. So this is all orchestrated. You know, they structure debts, IMF, World Bank, in such a way to where these African nations who have these resources that the world needs can't pay these debts back. So they remain in debt, you know, and then the terms, these contracts, they can have one for 50 years, 100 years. And then, you know, in some respects, there's nothing the African nation can do about that, you know, unless, again, a military coup takes place in 86, all contracts previous to their coming into power. But also couple that with the historically low African access to global capital. And that's where the IMF and World Bank comes in at. They won't give them, you know, grand sums of money to establish their own refineries and processing plants. This is something, you know, that's a part of the contract. We won't give you money to build your own plants. What we do is we'll make this contract, and in agreeing with this contract, you have to agree that we'll send the raw materials over to Europe or United States to have them processed. You know, that's how that worked. But yeah, historically low African access to global capital. Africa gets under 3% of global capital flows, despite 20% of world population. Reinforces a sense that the system is tilted. Well, we say rigged, you know, we say rigged. Now, the counter case, that's, you know, in light of this is how Africans look at the situation. Okay, we're supplying these raw minerals, and yet we get nothing from it or for it. Now, the counter case, in other words, the EU, Western countries, and the United States, or these Western governments anyway, and the EU argue that they're the largest trade and investment partner for Africa and point to programs like Global Gateway. It's a stated 150 billion euro package, all right, as evidence of genuine investment and not just extraction. All right, some point out that African governments themselves, not just Western companies, control mineral licensing, and that corruption, weak infrastructure, and governance gaps, not just Western policy, limit how much value gets retained locally. Now, again, what they're leaving out is the fact that, or what's left out is the fact that these governments in Africa, most of them are puppet governments set up by foreign nations, all right? And as a part or an agreement to them being in power, they have to agree to certain terms, all right? Look at it like that, you know? So it's easy for Western countries, the EU, the United States, and others to say, hey, wait a minute, it's not us. They have the licensing over there. We have nothing to do with that, you know? The corruption is brought into play based upon the relationship with Western countries who are also corrupt. They show them the ways of corruption, you know? Weak infrastructure. These countries, European, Western countries, have been over there extracting natural resources from these areas for decades, all right? And as a result, there's no infrastructure being built in these countries, African countries, that would make the lives of Africans in those countries better. No roads, you know, no water treatment plants, you know, things of that nature, you know, still dirt roads. Most of them still living something similar to huts and shacks, you know. The economy is, you know, just it's bad. Everything is bad over there. But these Western countries, corporations as well, go in, they extract these minerals, they take them, and they make big money off of them. They don't send anything back in terms of helping with the infrastructure, schools, hospitals, things like that, you know. So they are quick to say, well, that's not our fault. But yeah, it is, you know. Yeah, it is, you know. And you would think that anyone who has that type of investment in another country would do all it can to make sure that that country, you know, not just the government, but its people see some type of benefit as a result of this extraction and exporting of its its natural resources. Then add to this other countries, China, for instance, Gulf states and Russia, are now competing for the same resources with fewer human rights or governance conditions attached. So the West isn't acting, they like us to believe, in a vacuum, But here's the fact of the matter. The West have been over there again for decades. China and Russia has not. The West have seen huge profits. And not only that, but they've extracted raw material resources from the country, shipped them to their countries where, they have an abundance of this stuff, So way before China and Russia got there, the West was already there doing this, yet they were operating in a vacuum at that time. So it's one of several external actors and factors, and African governments increasingly pay them off. They look, there's this exchange, and the exchange is it's corruption. African leaders are or have been made corrupt by dealing with Western countries who, in their own way, draw up contracts and agreements that benefit the Western countries maybe 80-90% more than it would the country is getting those resources from. But now, that being said, there is a shift taking place in Africa, and it started with the Sahel states, the AES, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. African states now have more leverage than in the past. All right, mineral export bans, local content laws, and demands for in-country processing are gaining traction, and even EU officials publicly acknowledge that equal partnership rhetoric often outpaces practice. Whether that shift meaningfully changes outcomes for ordinary people, for instance, in the DRC, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, is the live unresolved question. GDP growth from resource wealth hasn't reliably translated just yet into broad-based development in most of these places, regardless of which external partner is involved. However, I want to add or include the fact that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have seen gains. And not only that, but their gains have been so substantial to where they don't have to go to the IMF or the World Bank, EU, anyone else for loans. They have been actually using their own resources to fund all of their projects. That would include buying weapons for the military, buying machinery, building facilities, processing plants. The advancement, the improvement in those three countries alone tells a different story than what we would be fed from European countries or Western countries. There's always this effort to paint that these countries, especially these three, are unstable, and they place that burden by trying to point out there's terrorism there, that jihadists or those individuals who want to overthrow the military government continue to wreak havoc on those countries' governments from establishing themselves and getting on their own feet. So Europe is using that as a means to try to find a way back in after being expelled and kicked out. Again, they use certain rhetoric, certain narratives, and propaganda to tell the United Nations and the world, hey, sooner or later, we're going to have to go back in there and set them straight because they don't know what they're doing. They need us, when the truth of the matter is, it's the other way around. Europe needs Africa. Africa had never needed Europe. And not only that, the fact is, and it shall remain, that Europe is dependent upon Africa. Also dependent upon the Middle East. There's a dependency here, but it's made to look like something it's not. You know, they will not admit that, yeah, we depend on these countries for our sustainability. You know, they won't admit that, you know, but what they will say, oh, these countries are war torn. There's too much conflict over there and we have to intervene. While at the same time they're saying this, they're also behind the scenes trying to figure out which corporations go in and extract these resources that they need to continue to sustain themselves. So it's a big game, one filled with nothing but corruption. So you begin to wonder, okay, where did these African leaders get this mindset of or about corruption and being corrupt? It's the interactions between the corrupt. The West is corrupt. You know, European nations are corrupt. United States is corrupt, you know. And so this is learned behavior, to say the least. Now, that being said, I do have, for instance, a clip. You know, I want to impart this, give you guys a little more context in terms of content. Before I do, as always, please like, share, follow, comment, and subscribe to TAP. You are tapped in. That is the art of political discourse. Your participating in viewership, we appreciate it greatly. All right. So thank you all for that. That being said, let's get to this clip. It will show a different light in terms of what's being told to the people by governments that would go over there and pillage and, you know, just take natural resources and not give anything in equity, you know, equally back to these countries.
Africa doesn't own their own wealth. It's their wealth, but they don't own it. Western companies own the mines in Africa. They extract the minerals. They set the prices. They ensure that the wealth will never benefit the people whose wealth it truly is. I mean, look at Congo today. Congo produces 70% of the world's cobalt. That's the mineral that powers your smartphone, your laptop, your electric car. Without Congolese minerals, there's no Tesla, there's no Apple, there's no Samsung. Yet the people of Congo remain among the poorest people in the world. Why? Because their wealth is not theirs. It's stolen by Western corporations.
Now, how's that possible? How is that possible that, you know, this country in Africa, the DRC, you know, Congo, has all these resources that the world needs to function, is as poor as it is? I just said that part of what makes this possible is the ongoing conflict. One of the main plays out of the European playbook is divide and rule, or divide and conquer, a term most of you are used to, divide and conquer, but they call it divide and rule. So you keep two parties fighting, you keep them separate, you keep them divided, you keep them at each other, while at the same time you go in. It's pretty much a distraction tactic. While they're fighting, you pretend to act as though you're mediating, trying to stop this war, while the whole while, or the whole time, you're actually allowing it or doing things for it to continue to wage on these wars. While that's happening, you send in your companies, your corporations, your mining corporations, companies, you go and you extract, you know, these minerals and resources, you ship them out. How's that possible? Well, the warring factions might have these areas they control with these minerals that the West needs, but they may run out of bullets. They may run out of motorcycles, armored vehicles, you know, guns. That's how agreements are made. So the West will come in because, as we know, the West are the producers of war materials. They produce war, you know, things that, you know, you need to, you know, be in a war with: guns, bullets, shells, all that. They'll come in and say, okay, yeah, you guys need it, but we need access to this. You give us access to this, we'll give you that, you know. And they do that with both sides, playing both ends, doing the middles, keep them armed with weapons of war, so they can continue fighting. And while they do, they've already got the agreement. They go in a certain area where the war isn't happening. They mine that area. They extract those natural resources and they send them out. Cold game, but that's
Western companies. The system is kept in place through war.
Yeah.
The West doesn't want a stable and independent Congo.
Yeah.
That's why they fund proxy wars, why they support rebel groups like M23. They use other African governments like Rwanda and Uganda to do their bidding, to keep Congo weak so that the wealth remains available for plunder. Wallahi, this is a grotesque injustice. It's a grotesque injustice that disgraces the whole world. Congo is a bleeding, open, gaping wound on this earth. Understand this, Africa will never be free until Congo is free.
And
no matter how well any individual African...
We tend to agree with that. In spite of what we see taking place in terms of growth, infrastructure, the things that are happening in real time in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, it means very little in the scope of things as long as the Congo is going through what they're going through, and the Congo seems to be the richest in trace minerals or those resources, rare earth, resources, minerals, or whatever. Again, all the things that they need to keep corporations, American corporations, as well as European corporations, thriving. Tesla, Microsoft, Samsung, that's just some, but those companies need those resources. Now, say, for instance, the Congo, the DRC was not at war with itself. Would they have these agreements? Would they have these contracts? Would they be able to come in and extract these natural resources and take them and make buku money off of them while the DRC continues to suffer, be impoverished, war torn, have nothing? I don't think so. I don't think so.
The country does. The continent as a whole will remain wounded, mortally wounded, so long as Congo is being plundered. Please understand.
Of course, the West needs Africa's resources most desperately to power airplanes, cell phones, computers, and engines. And the gold and diamonds, of course, the status symbol, to determine their powers by their core and to give value to their currencies. One thing that keeps me puzzled, despite having studied finance and economics at the world's best universities, the following question remains unanswered. Why is it that 5,000 units of our currency is worth 1 unit of your currency, where we are the ones with the actual gold reserves? It's quite evident that the aid is in fact not coming from the West to Africa, but from Africa to the Western world. The Western world depends on Africa in every possible way, since alternative resources are scarce out here. So how does the West ensure that the free aid keeps coming? By systematically destabilizing the wealthiest African nations and their systems, and all that backed by huge PR campaigns, leaving the entire world under the impression that Africa is poor and dying and merely surviving on the mercy of the West. Well done, Oxfam, UNICEF, Red Cross, Life Aid, and all the other organizations that continuously run multi-million-dollar advertisement campaigns depicting charity porn to sustain that image of Africa globally. Ad campaigns paid for by innocent people under the impression to help with their donations. While one hand gives under the flashing lights of cameras, the other takes in the shadows.
So why is the West pushing social issues so hard on the African continent? You've probably seen stories like this, where the aid that is being offered to Africa often comes with stipulations that they have to enact social reforms that are pretty unpopular. Well, there's a reason for this that I learned.
Now, I just mentioned that the West plays a certain type of corrupt game. They'll go in and they'll recognize what the needs are or what Africans are told to believe their needs are, and they'll offer them to them. However, there's always a caveat. There's always a catch, prerequisite, some type of condition attached to these agreements and contracts. If many of you can recall, years back, and even still to this day, the West was pushing for LGBTQ to be accepted in African countries, something that we all know even today is not just frowned upon, but is criminal, you know? And the pushback from Western governments, particularly and especially the United States, Obama and Biden also had a hand in this, was, okay, we're not going to give you grain, corn, anything if you do not accept LGBTQ in your societies. We're going to take that aid. We're going to take that aid from you. We'd rather see your children starve, go hungry, than to see you not allow homosexuality and lesbianism in your societies. Imagine that. Imagine that.
In politics, where I spent the better part of a decade being elected, and I want to share those with you. So one of the things that I learned in politics is that the general public has a limit for how much outrage that they have. So if they spend all of their time being angry on social issues, they don't have any time to be upset over economic issues. So if we have an aid package come in that comes with a whole bunch of stipulations that the people find really, really unpopular, they're not going to notice when the terms of that loan really work against their economy, or it's all siphoned out back to the West, leaving them with a whole bunch of debt. Again, it's a typical trick that we do in Western politics to our own people, create social.
He said trick, but we label it, we call it what it is. It's corruption. It's corruption. You know, it's corruption.
Issues that people get really riled up and angry on, because as long as they're angry about social issues, they're not angry about the financial issues. What we want from Africa isn't social reform. We genuinely, I'll tell you, we don't care about those issues that we say we care about. What we really want is the resources and the money, and to kind of keep them down. So again, if you see us pushing a whole bunch of weird agendas on you and you're like, why the heck are they doing that so hard? Well, now you got the reason. You'll be fighting over these social issues and you're not going to see that we're taking money out of the back of your pocket. Hopefully that's of value to you. Anyway, I'll see you guys on the next video.
We have a situation in South Africa where a white-owned capitalism or economic system has been exploiting our people, and our people have not been benefiting from the mineral resources in our country. We have a company called the London Mine, which is mining in a place called Marikana. In that mine, the mine has got everything, all the basic needs: water, electricity, roads. And just next to a mine is a township or a village where black people stay without water and electricity, without roads, without proper schools. Yet London Mine is taking their platinum and reinforcing and making London and Britain to be what it is. We cannot claim to be Africans, yet we have nothing to show as a proof that indeed we are Africans. For because we do not even have title deeds to prove that we are the owners of the land, we have nothing to show. When you go into mines, it's multinational companies. When you go into banks, it's multinational companies. When you go into monopoly industries, it's multinational companies. We cannot even own and protect our own agricultural sector with our fertile land in Africa, because Europe and the entire developed countries use Africa and South Africa as a dumping site. Every lower grade food get to be dumped in our countries, undermining our own agriculture. When we say those things, we are called communists, we are called anarchists, we are called radicals, because we must continue to bow before a white supremacist. We're refusing that.
Great piece there. That is the circumstance or the condition. That is the situation in Africa. So that was just South Africa, you know, and I did not intentionally mean to leave out South Africa in terms of its struggles that have to do with, European intervention or European ownership of land where resources are mined and extracted for European use, European profit. There is South Africa. There is the DRC. There is the Sahel, all the Sahel states, not just Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Chad. There are others, that provide resources for the West, France, EU, and the United States. These countries, though, they take the resources from these African nations and they ship them home and use them to their benefit. They benefit enormously of these resources. All the while, the places where the resources come from, it's just the whole land is impoverished. There's no infrastructure in most of these townships in South Africa, shanty towns, some of the most fertile land on the planet, and yet they can't grow their own food. The fact of the matter is, yes, Europe is dependent upon Africa, and it's not the other way around. That's been a lie that's been told for a very long time. It's been a lie. Africa is actually independent of all things European. But because the Europeans have established how business is ran in Africa, Africans suffer as a result of these agreements and these white supremacist actions and programs, or just call it what it is, the raping and pillaging, the colonization of these lands. Only Europeans profit from it or benefit from it. And that, we see here at TAP, we tend to think in our discussions that that's going to change. That is changing, actually. And that's a good thing, especially for Africans. Oh, no doubt about it that Europe is doing its damnedest to throw a wrench in any development or, a motion or shift towards change. They want to stop that. They need to stop that. If not, then the truth will come out in terms of Europe needing Africa far more than Africa needs Europe. All right. Let us know what you think about this piece. Is it okay for Europe to do this? To cheat a people, their natural resources, to leave them impoverished while they, they gain from it, they profit? Let us know. Put your thoughts in the comments. We'll answer each and every one of them. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.